Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you can actually click on the little thing down below, and you can actually join us here at in Zoom, and then you'll see another link down below, and you can join us in Mukana. That's where you can ask questions, vote on questions, talk to each other. Those are all things that are possible there. Now, if you think that you see us answering these questions and you think you can answer some of them, we would love to have you on the panel. The panel is a constantly moving a group of experts that are here to answer your questions and question some of your answers. But if you want to come in, you just need to be here by 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. If you are not sure if your kit is quite ready yet, then come in early. We open at 6 o'clock in the morning. General questions, are for the first hour. So we start at 7 o'clock, and those are just anything you want to ask about virtual events or media production. Second hour is usually something that we think is a little bit more important. We'd like to spend an extra hour on it. Today we have Matt Bach from Puget Systems, and Puget Systems they make high-end workstations. So Matt will be answering your questions about hardware, integration, and what actually makes a difference when you're building these out. So it should be very interesting. Now tomorrow we're going to talk about Clubhouse. What have we figured out? What are we doing there? So we'll talk a little bit about that. Also, we'll talk about our kit. I think our kits are starting to stabilize, but we'll talk about how we're getting into Clubhouse. Wednesday, video compression primer. People have been asking about what settings should you use and what compressors should you use. This isn't so much live streaming, but just general compression. Thursday, we'll talk about event pre-production. So we've talked about walking through locations, but what are all the things we have to think about before the event and kind of working through that. Friday, getting started with AWS. So this is going to be the beginning of a couple weeks. We're going to kind of talk about how to set up AWS and get started, but our goal is to get to a point where you understand how to install things like Vmix and Zoom and so on and so forth in AWS, and we start getting more comfortable with that. I think it's important for us to know how all that works. Saturday, of course, is education, and Resolve. The folks from Ripple Training come back for Resolve training at 10 o'clock in the morning. So it should be a lot to manage there. Now, if you want to actually share what we're doing, you can. You go ahead and just I'm going to put the link into Mukana, the larger we get, the more people that are here when we're doing these events, the different people we can invite. so it's important, and we learn from each other. I mean, this is probably a very odd group that is not really built around one person disseminating information, or even a few of them. What makes us powerful is the large number of people in Discord, and the large number of people on the panel, the large number of people conversing. And so the larger it gets, the better it's going to get. So if you think that you know people that are interested, we'd love to have them join the group. All right, Bill, let's go ahead and take it away.
Okay, the first question comes in from Washington, D.C. Greg Gibson inquires as to when pinning screens for Zoom broadcasts, is there any advantage or disadvantage to using screen resolutions larger than 1080? For example, is it better or worse to pin speakers on 4K screens?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, all you're doing essentially is up-resing using the software. It'd be like in Photoshop taking a 1920 by 1080 image and scaling it up to 3840 by 2160. So there is an advantage, and it will actually put a load on your system. So if you're doing NDI, it's going to just saturate that thing. Since I'm pretty familiar with Greg's setup, I would say that the one advantage that there is to do gallery view as 4K, because the titles of people actually become very small, so you get more of the person. And we're still doing some tests to see if there's actually any scaling. From what I remember in a conversation with Grant, there was no additional numbers. You don't gain any resolution on a 4K display. So, I mean, Zoom's doing its best, and they're not giving you any additional bits because you're in 4K. So it's just the way that the graphics card displays and the UI displays the image.
Next question.
Moving on, Brian Carpenter of Cleveland, Ohio is up next. With hearing each panelist declare their audio chain during the sound check has been very helpful. Is there a way to have them periodically declare their video chain with a camera and lens, switcher, capture card, and so forth? Or is that part of the upcoming panelist profile webpage?
I think that it's fine to use either or. I mean, mostly I just want something that is educational for everyone when we do the mic checks. So I'm fine with panelists making a decision about whether they talk about their video chain or their audio chain. I'd like to start with the audio chains most of the time, but if you want to switch back and forth, I prefer that over anything else that you might want to say. So, talking about our change, I think keep us, kind of more focused and to business. All right, next question.
Doug Ferguson's up next, panelist almost every day from Fort Wayne, Indiana, who says making up a 4-up background. Who puts the graphic on the bottom layer and who keys it on the top layer?
You mean who or explain what you're...
No, I think he's doing a little poll. How many people?
I'd just like to see everybody's opinion. Like if you're building a graphic, who puts it on the bottom or who keys it?
We'll put up a poll, but while we're doing that, go ahead, Jason and Jeffrey.
I mean, so I do it on both. I use a background graphic, which can be motion as a source or otherwise, and then to size the windows correctly, I'll use a downstream keyer to kind of tighten them and to get rid of the corners and that kind of thing.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing. As you know, graphics always on the left side, and I always do a bug on the right side per graphic, and then anything else will come from the right side, especially because I've been playing with the the passing graphics, follow me type stuff.
And we just let's see, hold on, let's see, active. There we go. So we just sent the poll out to everyone. So go ahead and answer it. Go ahead, Peter.
Well, I guess I do it completely differently because I use Memo Live to do it all together in one shot.
Right. So software.
It's all software, so it's all neat and square, and all the edges line up, everything.
Well, the reason I ask, I'm doing a show this weekend that all have anywhere from 1-up to 4-up. So I'm building 1-ups, 2-ups, 3-ups, 4-ups, and I might go from a 2-up to a 3-up or a 1-up to a 4-up, and I'm using my TriCaster. So I'm bringing everybody into Zoom, NDI, into the TriCaster, and then I want to set up my MEs. And I've just gotten various opinions of, I've been putting them on the bottom so I could switch between my two MEs, but then I got other people saying that they would key them. So just wanted to get everybody's opinion.
And you're talking about the graph. Yeah, so there's, most people put them on the bottom. So most broadcasters will put video screens over top of the graphic because it's easier to key it in. So it's easier to, it's more straightforward and it's easier to key in. Now, I will say that I mostly key the graphics over top because I like rounded corners, and mostly I like rounded corners because broadcasters can't do it. Like their whole system is set up to put the video in, and they have hard squares by adding. You'd be surprised at how often I put up I don't know why it said, I don't know. I have a poll running, but it's, we'll see if it's not showing up. We'll go. Anyway, let's not give me those notes. I don't need those. Anyway, so I lost my train of thought. Yeah. Let's not give me notes ever again. Like I can't do that. Like I just can't have that while I'm talking. The only time to put the notes up is when I'm waiting. Someone else is talking. You can't do it while I'm talking. So because we'll just move on. I don't have anything else to say. The main thing is that I do it over top because I can do that. You can make it look like it's underneath it, but you give it the little rounded corners, and you'd be surprised at how often graphics folks will ask you how you did that because they're not, a lot of switchers aren't set up that way, and they don't do it that way. So you can add a lot more flourishes when you put it over top. But I will say that the general consensus is to put them underneath. But I feel like that's just because no one's being creative. They're just trying to do it quickly. On a Atem, we build those all into macros, so that we can switch from 1 to 2. And that's what makes the Constellation so amazing, is that for an Atem user, I mean, this isn't that big of a deal for a TriCaster, but I can use a macro to push the new layout into the preview and then just cut to it. And seamlessly just be cutting back and forth between those. So 2 super sources becomes super useful, because if you go from one macro to the other, you will see a glitch, and so so that's the reason that the Constellation is so powerful that way. Otherwise, what you do is you just cut out to a single, and then this is why some switchers do that and why you see it on shows. You cut to a single and then you hit the macro and then you cut back, and that's one of the ways that you use that transition. Go ahead, Courtney.
I was just going to say I'd use both as well, especially if you have a moving background, because if you've got an animated background, then you don't want to see it jump cut if you're changing your box arrangement around, because it might be distracting.
Next question.
Peter Rosado of Las Vegas is in with any thoughts on how OnZoom would compare to offerings like Blue's OBVIO, and he has a link.
Go ahead, John.
I think my understanding is, and I don't have all the details on OBVIO yet, but OnZoom is just a social platform that has discoverability for your Zoom shows, and OBVIO is more of a event management system, is my understanding.
Go ahead, John.
I think one thing that's a real neat feature of OnZoom is that if you're a not-for-profit and you're accepting donations, 100% of the funds that are donated go to the organization. Zoom covers the transaction cost. So for not-for-profits and like some of the things we're doing with the park, that saves us the transaction fee for donations.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, that's Blue, isn't it, on screen there?
Yep.
That they're showing? Yeah, he was just on here, and
Yep.
It's $997, and I guess you get a Tony Robbins type thing. That's what he's doing there. He's kind of like
I don't know if it's a Tony Robbins type thing, but the main thing is that OBVIO is going to allow you to build much more complex events than what you're going to get with OnZoom. OnZoom is a great platform. It's probably easier to set up. It's less expensive, and it's going to be something that's going to be useful. It's just, I think it's two different things. I wouldn't even consider them.
Yeah,
I would almost say that they're not even competitive.
Yeah,
each
the
other.
one's just a directory of
Right.
shows, and this is
A directory of
OBVIO's
shows
platform.
with e-commerce. It's a directory of shows with e-commerce, which is useful
Right.
for a lot of people. So,
Yeah.
so it's a really good initiative by Zoom. I think OBVIO is for folks who are going to build a more complex experience that for their given event.
Would this be a good choice for like a conference like South by? Because we were talking about their choice of platform
I think that
earlier.
it's still coming up to speed. So I don't know if I would have put it that much pressure, a South by Southwest pressure on OBVIO. I don't know if that's that. I think even Grant or Blue would probably say, "Oh, I don't know if we're ready for that." For that many different things. But maybe I'm wrong. But I think that they're still coming up to speed. I think next year, yeah, probably. Next question.
John Pewitt here in the panel. When looking at a resume or CV, curriculum vitae, how do you evaluate them? What's your best practice?
I don't use CVs, so I don't know. I mean, I make one up every once in a while because someone requires it. Some government agency or someone feels like they need to know what my CV is, so I have one that's really basic. That doesn't really say anything. It's just the facts. I hire people because of who they know or who I know or how they, or basically generally hire people that I know, that are in a social network. I think CVs are really difficult. I think it's fine. I don't have any knowledge in how to read a CV because I don't know if I've ever looked at one of any person that I've ever hired, ever, and I've only submitted mine like maybe once or twice. Like usually, if someone asks for my CV, I just lose interest and move on. Anyway, Stephen.
If I could hit the button. Mainly I use it as, do they know how to spell and form a sentence? But most of it's like hiring a violinist. I want to hear you play.
Yeah. I mean, almost everybody I've hired, I've worked with, and I think part of it is that I hired so many people out of the former Pixel Corps that I had been working with them in teams, for so long that I knew which ones were going to show up and which ones weren't. And, and that's kind of how I kind of approach that puzzle. I think that someone's LinkedIn profile is probably more important than their CV at this point. Go ahead, John Edelson, and then Jeffrey.
At the university, my research was in electronic portfolios or digital representation. So we had our students create electronic portfolios, and in teacher education, we had a number of teachers who were hired even without an interview based on their digital portfolio. So I think in some areas it's very useful. So
I will say that building a social following around what you do and being part of a larger community is a lot easier than sending out resumes. Go ahead, Jeffrey. But it takes time.
Yeah, I have a basic CV myself, but I find I wouldn't put too much into it because 90% of the time they end up giving you forms and you have to fill out the same exact information, just like with a resume. It's stupid, but I have it.
Go ahead, JJ.
I obviously have one, and what I like is when it
auto-populates through a given form. But more importantly, looking at like LinkedIn, I having worked in the Silicon Valley and in an industry, the engineering industry, I always think it's interesting to see the timing of when folks all of a sudden have a number of recommendations, usually right around the time when they've started a new job. And so it tells me a little bit about the character of the person, that they're willing to either reach out to folks they work with, and that those people also had a positive experience with them, that they would be willing to recommend them for future jobs. So that's, I mean, it's not really like a standard how you use LinkedIn, but
It's
kind of look at the psychology of of what's happening beforehand.
And I have to admit, my LinkedIn profile is almost completely organic. You know, I put stuff in there. I mean, I keep it up to date, but I made it more up to date when I wasn't working. but for a long time, I didn't bother with it. But you know, everything there is. But I think that's when people see that you have a lot of connection in that area. I think it's probably more powerful than a CV. But I also think that continuing to serve your market. I mean, what I've done every single time is go back to serve your market, you know, build relationships, and then things just kind of sort themselves out. But there's no fast fix. You know, it's not something you do in a month or two. It's something I've been doing for, you know, years. Go ahead, Jason.
A couple months ago, I was an expert witness over Zoom in court, and I did a CV for the first time in, I don't know, a decade since I'd finished college, and you know, basically it was just something they wanted to depose me about. So whatever I gave them, they deposed me about it.
I don't.
Whatever.
I will say that I've never gotten a job from a CV, so that's probably why I don't look at it. Like I've sent CVs out a couple times, you know, oh, this will be, and I haven't gotten one, so I'm just like, this is useless. You know, like why would I bother? So I haven't bothered again. Next question.
Brian Carpenter of Cleveland, Ohio says the suggested pyle headworn microphone with Sabrent adapter didn't sound as good during a Google Meet session yesterday as the office hours panelists who use the same mic. Do those panelists using the pyle headworn somehow enhance with more than the Sabrent or Itechrise 3.5 to USB adapter?
I think the Sabrent is very low volume. I don't think that the Sabrent is a good USB connection. I think I have both of them, and I think the Sabrent is a solid 6 dB lower than the Itechrise, at least the ones that I own. So I'd have to test them to be absolutely sure. But I when I looked at them, that's what I felt like I was getting, and so I wouldn't buy the Sabrent if I didn't have to. Chris,
I think beyond that, of course, and we've seen it here. If that mic element isn't exactly in the right place, it's going to sound vastly different, even if it's just an inch back from where it should be. So that's a huge part of it.
Absolutely. Next question.
Felipe Baez of Prague, Czechia, and here in the panel often. For those of you who have tried, what's your opinion about the Universal Audio Apollo Twin X? Recommended, worth the price? What would be other USB-C audio interfaces you'd recommend?
Anyone? Oh, go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I was pointing to Bill because he just switched to the Apollo Solo, but UA has a great pedigree in terms in the industry. Like they built some of the best preamps, compressors, and in the audio world. So you can't go wrong with any of their products, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't have any experience with the Apollo, so I don't have any knowledge of it. I think that the ones we've used have been Mutu and UAs and MixPre's. I mean, those are the ones that I know. So, but Bill, you like your Apollo Solo? Obviously, you bought it.
It took some effort to use, though. I just want to let you know that this is designed for kind of professional use and professional circumstances that I was expecting from my other audio interfaces for it to be a bit more plug and play. Not that it's ridiculously complex, but it is designed for highly professional recording circumstances. I've used the example that I thought it was going to be a 2-in or 1-in, 2-out, because this is a solo, an Apollo Solo. And it turns out that behind the scenes, it's actually taking 10 in and sending 10 out for people who need things like in-studio headphone mixes for musicians. And there's just a lot under the hood that you have to get your head wrapped around. So it's not just plug in and get with it. It's taken me a week or two to study to get it even to where I am now. And I think I'm probably at about 10% of what it does. So
next question.
Jonas Dottel of Reutlingen, Germany is up next. And Jonas says, is there a cheap way to add a mix minus for 3 sources to a setup around an Atem Mini Extreme? Note for 3 remote presenters in Zoom, person-to-person or peer-to-peer, and 1 loci presenter.
I have to look. I think that there's actually in the audio options, I think that you actually have split audio. Is it split audio? Let's see here. There is I'm not sure if the Extreme has the mix minus. It doesn't appear to. Where there's a mix minus audio that the larger switchers have, larger than more extreme than the extremes. I have an Extreme connected to my computer right now, and I'm seeing what I didn't realize, split audio into separate mono channels, which is pretty slick. But I don't see unless I'm missing some setting here, I don't see a place to set up a mix minus within the switcher. I thought that some of the other Atems do have that capability, and so I don't know where that went here. Anyone else for a mixer? Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, there are absolutely no mix minuses on any of Blackmagic's HDMI switchers because you get it through SDI. Camera Control always returns program audio with mix minus. So none of the HDMI channels, even the TV Studio Pro that has 4 HDMI and then 4 SDI, you'll get the returns. But yeah, the cheapest way to do it is with a cheap. Yeah.
Because you're sending a whole signal back over SDI, whereas with HDMI, you're kind of cheating and you're going back a little data signal on the way back. So you're not getting the full signal back. So that makes sense. I mean, HDMI barely carries it just carries the data. SDI is carrying the whole signal return. So that's why I can do a mix minus on the SDI based switchers. You're right, Jason. That's a good point. I'm just trying to think of like a relatively inexpensive mixer to use.
Allen and Heath Z14 will give you 4 aux sends, and that'll give you 4 mix minuses.
Mm-hmm. Mickey?
Yeah, but that would require having an analog interface for each machine, which adds up like for 3 sources. Like I would probably go along the lines of Dante Virtual Sound Card and a cheap mixing software platform. Like I think Voice Meter might be able to do it if it could create enough auxes.
Right, Jeffrey.
I believe the TouchMix 8 from Alesis could do that, but you're going to have to pan left, pan right to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Next question.
JJ McKenna, Santa Venetia in Marin County, California, says, Courtney, what method are you using to insert the occasional sound filters you use?
You're not making it.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. It's just the old hello, the Samson mix pad, and it has an effects bus, digital effects bus, and you have a knob. You turn it up to feed the effects, and you turn it down to get rid of them.
That's great. It's high tech. All right.
It's magic.
All right. Next question.
Dan Huber of Erie, Pennsylvania says, I noticed the Zoom app on the Facebook portal auto updated. I don't notice anything different. Does anybody understand what was updated in the Facebook portal auto update?
Most of those updates are security or bug fixes. They're not usually, I don't think that I haven't heard any new features. No. Oh, go ahead, John.
I suggest you keep doing updates. It's prepping for things.
Very good.
Now you know.
Spring is coming.
Spring is
coming. Oh, gosh.
I need to get a portal. All right, next question.
James Babbitt of San Diego is up next with, as the host doing the switching in a Zoom meeting, is there a way to switch from speaker view to grid view for everyone in the meeting? The setting follow host view controls the order of the frames in grid view, but it does not control the change between grid and speaker view.
Yeah, go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, unfortunately, not in the meeting. The only control you have in terms of forcing people on what they can see is spotlighting, but you can't make them force them to see, to look at gallery view or active speaker view.
Next question.
Eddie Martinez of Sacramento, California says thoughts on an automated way to assign co-hosts to 50 breakout rooms.
I think you would have to, I think the hard part in the breakout rooms in general, and correct me if I'm wrong for anyone who's using them more than I am, but that you really have to either auto-populate everyone or auto-populate or bring people in. It seems like there's not a lot of ways to, you kind of preset that. I guess you could preset the 50 and have the co-hosts pre-assigned, but then the question is, I mean, if you can pre-assign everybody into those breakout rooms, then it makes it easier. It's the kind of halfway in between. You don't seem to have those tools. And by the way, we're running a little low on first hour questions. So if you've got questions, this is a good day to ask them. Go ahead, Peter.
I was going to say I've done exactly which is what you were describing. I've preloaded people who I knew were co-hosts using the CSV file into the breakout room definitions, and then deal with the labor-intensive process of moving everybody else into the appropriate breakout rooms because they didn't tell me ahead of time where they wanted to go.
Right.
But it is extraordinarily labor-intensive.
Yeah. Guy.
I don't have the total answer, but something that's helpful is to put a star in front of co-host name, and that way they pop to the top when you're sorting alphabetically, and you can just grab, and go.
Yeah. Go ahead, Leo.
So we went a bit further. We actually asked all of the people to put their number of the breakout room, so it goes further than what just Guy said, because then you were literally going, as Peter says, it's incredibly labor intensive and incredibly completely different to everything else in Zoom. And but if you have the numbers, you can literally go 1, 1, 1, 3, 3, 3, and you can just do it really fast. That's the only way we could do it.
Go ahead, Peter. Oh, you're muted.
So to add to that point, when I do my courses for the scouts, we give them patrol names. So we use the first letter of the patrol name to, for those of you who are used to scouts, but to exactly what Leo was saying. Otherwise, you can't figure it out. And Guy, for your point, the co-hosts are always the Zulu patrol. So they collate differently, but you know where they collate to, right?
Is that something you could use? Would Zoom OSC be able to move people?
I don't think it can right now.
Right.
I wish it could.
I think the last time we talked to Andy about it, he said that the breakout rooms was something that wasn't working in Zoom.
Yeah, the SDK is
doesn't allow that for that.
Yeah.
I do think that one of the biggest opportunities for Zoom to expand what it does is being more robust in its support of breakout rooms. I think that I went from like, I don't know why I want to use them to, I use them all the time and I use them in very complex ways. And I wish that I could do more, that there are, for me, the big thing is breakouts to breakouts. Like if I could get basically n number of subdivisions would be really powerful, because now you could, if you did want to break out and then have, okay, we're all going to talk about something for 300 people, then we're going to split it into rooms of 10. But then you could split to paired sharing or small groups or talk whatever inside of that. And even if you get into self-spawning, so Leo and I and Peter want to talk about something, we can just create a room, that is something that we can all, and this gets into that kind of hallway conversation of, let's just go talk about this right now. Not find a room, but actually generate one of them as users that would still be public, and still be possibly, tied into where you could hear them. It's not like a private room, but it would be something that they could generate so that they're just kind of off on their own to talk about a little bit about, or even be able to lock it if you gave them that opportunity. Anyway, it'd just be an interesting, I think that's a really interesting place where if Zoom adds that with the existing infrastructure, be really powerful for the, a really powerful solution. Peter and then Leo.
I agree with you, but we got to make sure the controls are around it correctly, because there are certain issues that I have to deal with. Say youth protection issues that you have to be very careful about.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that I think that what we do in Unity right now is stuff that you'd want to be able to have built into Zoom, where you literally can just roll over something and hear the room. Like that there's that you can and quickly throw people into co-hosts or monitors or whatever. But being able to have an audio pipeline in the back end for the administrator to be able to at will listen to either all the conversations or some of the conversations, basically just be able to activate it. Would be super powerful. Yeah, go ahead, Leo.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of areas on there that are particularly difficult at the moment. Another example is that Peter was talking about the ability to preload. Preload only works for one set of rooms, so invariably you have an event where you go, let's all break out into these rooms, and now we're going to split back in, and we're now going to go break out the second way. You can't preload. You can only do that once, and if the meeting starts before the preload is in, I've found that I haven't been able to activate a preload. It's too late.
And this gets into whether I always wonder whether Zoom should be putting these features in or just extending their SDK. Like do they? I don't know if it makes sense for them to do some of this stuff, but there is the opportunity to build very complex, like to your point, be able to basically preset. I'm going to go to this kind of grouping, then this kind of grouping, then this kind of grouping. And for an admin, what you want is just buttons, go into phase 1, go into phase 2, go into phase 3, and be able to change the configuration of how those breakouts work. And I'm able to live drive, like between session breakout 1 and breakout 2, I could decide who's going to all go into that one and then just hit go, and off it goes, and you have a team back there doing that. And again, those are the kind of things that it's very hard to do without Zoom. So it'd be hard to build your own platform that would do this. But it's something that, again, I kind of feel like Zoom extending the SDK makes more sense to really give people the control to do that. Because I just don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's enough of a focus, or my concern always now with companies, and I think Zoom has done a pretty good job avoiding this, is just the infrastructure. I was thinking about this morning walking around, and Zoom needs kind of a F1. They need an F1 team. Like that's what they need, is Zoom needs an F1 team. Like, F1 is the thing that is the aspirational team that Ford or Ferrari or something, you're not going to go buy an F1, but then, but you get tons and tons of resources to go down and build crazy things, and then feed that information back of like performance issues and so on and so forth. But, my team was very much the F1 team for, Hangouts and then Facebook Live. And so that's what we did was we just took the platform, barely used it. We used it as a back end infrastructure, and then just took it, stretched it as far as it could. And I think that that's something that's missing that I don't see Zoom doing. Maybe they are, but you would see it somewhere, because it's usually some crazy project that gets you thinking about it. Anyway, next question.
JJ McKenna is back from Santa Venetia with, did Doug Ferguson find a different durable solution for remote control of USB devices for his playback replay equipment?
Doug?
I did not. it didn't work. Still,
can you let people know what you're trying to do again?
Well, we were trying to use a 3-play replay system remotely using the controller on one end and the 3-play at the other. And a lot has to do with the networks that you're on. So that's what we ran into. We could make it work in a clean network, but when you're going through firewalls in a university network, that they cut some things down.
I would experiment on the Mac side. I think that there is Softron makes a replay system, M replay system, that with a screen share could very well work, because it doesn't require the low latency controller deck, and I think that you could theoretically, it'd be something to think about. I know it's on a Mac though. So anyway, next question.
Leo Mendel, Leo here on the panel from the UK, is asking how the message that is automated every 5 minutes in Zoom here on the show that says Mukana is the chat tool, how is that automated?
We use this
Chatomator.
It's a Chatomator. It's the Chatomator, and so the so Chad puts it in every 5 minutes. It's amazing. It's like, but it's the Chatomator. That's the technical term for it. Now we're gonna have to Yeah, no, it's a service that is amazing that Chad see the Chatomator responded to us. It's got an automated response system. You talk about
Very
the
low
Chatomator.
latency too.
So Chad
And
Lafarge.
it's the Chatomator's birthday. Just so you know.
Chatomator
Is it the
dismissed.
Chatomator? Wait, it's the Chatomator's birthday?
The Chatomator's
Today?
birthday is today.
Today?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, here we go. It has to
Okay.
be done.
Yeah,
All
she
right.
goes
All right.
to
All
bed.
right. Here we go. All right.
Responsible.
All right. Ready? Ready, everybody? No. Okay. No. Okay. Yeah, okay. Ready? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Chad. Happy birthday to you.
Many
Let's hear it
more.
for the Chadnator.
It's a beautiful mess.
Let's save
Happy
not
birthday,
actually
Chad.
hitting the cowbell.
Yeah. All right, next question.
Jonathan J. of New Jersey is in next with looking into the Atem 8K Constellation. What are your thoughts on this platform versus Vmix, especially when it comes to the creation of multiple picture-in-pictures on screen? Can you cascade mix effects buses internally to create larger layouts? For example, a 6-up, 6 people on a panel with a background of lower thirds and so on.
So I have a bunch of constellations. So I obviously lean. I lean towards the Constellation. I think that Vmix is a really powerful, and you'll have a lot more flexibility with Vmix in a lot of places, as far as especially those layouts. Now we have done 6-ups. We have cascaded those with DVEs, and so 6-up is definitely a doable thing inside the Constellation. And then we do heavy. We have a heavy use of macros, to make up for those things. The thing that we found playing with Vmix is that number one is the number of outputs. When you're used to a Constellation, the number of outputs on Vmix feels very sparse. Like we're used to. I got 24 definable outputs from my Constellation, and we use a lot of them. So everything from mono outputs to multiple program outputs to different, lots and lots of different things that are coming out of that machine that you cannot do in Vmix. You can do a lot out of Vmix. It's got lots of outputs, but it doesn't have, it's like 2 or 4 or something, or, there's like for program outs and so on and so forth. So we found that was a little limiting. And then we actually are, we hit a couple places where, at least in the machines that we had, that Vmix started to drop frames, and that just scares me a lot. like it was, now we were doing a lot with it, but when I see, that's the thing that scares me the most about software based systems, and why I tend to lean towards hardware based systems, is because on a hardware based system, I generally can't ask the system to do more than it can do. Like it just goes, I can't do that. So it's more limited than the software system, but it also, you can't stack up things that will cause it to, come apart, so I think that those were the things that we kind of listed up, between them. I think that Vmix, we're going to be doing more and more Vmix stuff in the cloud, and I'm pretty excited about that. So I think Vmix is a I think the fight is really between people who want to use Vmix and people who want to use Atems. I think that a lot of the other ones are in our world, in the interactive world, not the broadcast world. Those are the two big winners. But I think that I still lean towards hardware, and I may adjust that over time, but still pretty happy with what I got. Jason, and then John.
Alex, I can't imagine using anything as big as a Constellation without like a control surface, like the one I have over here, like the 1ME or the 2ME. Have you found that it's usable with the Atem app itself, just with the Atem app?
We use the 2ME board, the new 2ME board.
Much easier. Yeah, it's just so many inputs. It's mind blowing.
I will admit that I have a little bit of buyer's regret. Wish I had bought the 4. So it's a 4ME board. Like the 2ME seems so big when we bought it and so cool. And now I look at it and I go, I should have got the 4ME board, because it's just having those buttons out in front of you and being able to select it just makes a difference, especially with someone who really knows it. Like when Kevin Maurer does a lot of our shows, and he just knows that board backwards and forward, and that physical interface on the way out really makes a big difference on how fast you can work. John?
I say you use both devices in the same, in the same system. You get the flexibility of Vmix with software, and then you got the reliability of the Constellation. I've used every software switcher. Every one has crashed in the middle of a production, so I have a sour taste in my mouth.
Yeah. Yeah. Doug?
You said, the difference between like the event world now, but what do you think in the broadcast world? And do you think the event world is becoming the broadcast world?
I don't know. I
I think
think
it's
that
the other way around.
So, well, I think that the I think the broadcast is in general is in big trouble. I think that it's it's going to continue to shrink, and I think that part of it is things like these. There's this. I kind of feel like interactive is kind of like those the undead in the Return of the King at the end of attacking big broadcast is that there's just 1,000 little shows that are about to start happening, where everyone's starting to use these switchers, and the switchers, I think that the Extreme solved a bunch of big problems for folks of not quite enough inputs and not quite enough control. And I think that all of us are making these smaller shows, and eventually what happens is we're going to eat away at people's view time. Like, how many people here watch less other things because they're doing office hours? And imagine if we had, they're filling up you have a certain amount of view time that you can spend on this when you're not doing the things with your family or not doing things you get paid for, and so the issue is that now that people have the tools to broadcast themselves, they're going to start producing much, much more niche content that doesn't need the budget that a broadcast, system does. That doesn't need $250,000 or $500,000 or a $750,000 a show to do. It can be done for $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000, and it can look really good. And I think that as people like us get better at doing them, and people get better at thinking about them, every organization becomes a broadcaster. Like, I just feel like every organization is eventually going to become a broadcaster to their constituents. Every church, every school, every brand, every organization, every nonprofit, every knitting club, they're all going to become their own little groups of doing things. And as that happens, it doesn't mean that they're not going to watch any TV, but I think that there are other areas that they're going to watch that are really hot items. So you have the Apple TVs and stuff like that. We're still going to want to sit down and just watch a show. That's not going to go away. You have the TikToks. That's just disposable content. You have YouTube, which has become a great place to just find videos about things, that you're interested in. You have then you have sports. Although I don't, looking at my own kids' behavior, I don't know how big sports will be, physical sports will be in the future. I think that esports is going to keep on building up. They haven't had their moment yet. I mean, they're big, but they haven't had like a sports moment yet. When they have that, I think that that's going to be, live sports are interesting, and then there'll be some breaking news. But I think when you look at, like, if you open up YouTube TV or your cable channel and you see 500 channels, those are not sustainable, over time, because all the attention that we were going to give to something like that, I think, is going to continue to deteriorate, and they're just going to keep on. And this is what we saw with, fundamentally, it's what we saw with newspapers, and magazines. They're just getting annihilated because that generalized information source isn't interesting to people because they have access to more vertical things. Go ahead, Leo, and then John. No, we'll move on. We're running out of time.
So
now we have lots of
mentioned
questions.
you mentioned about sport very quickly. My local football team, which is actually the level below the Premiership in the UK, because of where we are in the moment, they have started doing every single game. They started every single game going live. Complete change for them. Put in Vmix, put in a whole load of other things, put in a studio or use one of the studios that was already at the ground. The program quality, because of the talent they can, they literally have a raft of ex-players that they can bring in. So every week it's twice as good as what I would get if I'm watching the standard stuff off Sky. I'm just getting the same broadcasters saying the same lame comments that they've been saying, because that's the list of the 5 things they know about my team. Right. It's a completely different level of quality. And okay, I'm paying £10 a game. Will I stop if I was given the option? I don't think I will ever stop. I'll pay it. Yeah.
And that's so that's the whole, these niche buildup of stuff that really answers the question that we have. Like we did a whole bunch of basketball games, and we had a pro and a social media person that was really into the game as well, talking about the game. And I learned more about basketball in one season than I knew in my whole lifetime, and it was so much more interesting than the broadcast. like I don't need you to tell me what every play is and that everybody scored. I just saw it. I saw that, I don't need you to tell me that they're now up 21-6 or whatever that is. Like I can see the scoreboard. What I want you to do is talk and deepen my understanding of what the plays are and how they work and how they, and so allowing our geeks to fly free, they just like do their thing and say what they're going to say about things that we're really interested in, whatever that vertical is going to be the future. And it's going to be a bunch of tiny little shows but some of them will grow to hundreds of thousands. And you've already seen this in YouTube and Twitter and, a lot of other social media has already shown that, but it's going to become a broadcast. John, and then JJ, real quick.
You mentioned the 500 channels on cable and nothing to watch. How is this going to be curated? That's where I see the big problem. I now have too many places I have to look, or the luck of somebody pointing me to something.
There's a lot of us thinking pretty hard about that. I don't have anything to say in public right now. Go ahead, JJ, and then Jason.
I think that one of the things that might allow portions of those older broadcast methods or public information methods to endure is whether or not it's interactive. And I think that's one of the things that we've been talking about here is making Zoom more interactive so that it is something that people can connect to. And one of my favorite old shows that's no longer around was Car Talk. And it was this odd interactive interface with two brilliant guys who allowed the folks to come back and return and that
although that was not, it was much more built up than you would think. Car Talk, like the whole team of stuff. We're going to keep moving because we're running out of time. Let's go to the next question.
Mark Harder of Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn says, tired of trying OBS on a Mac, drift dropout functionality. OBS on a PC maybe is an option, or Vmix either on a PC or cloud to get used to AWS. How long would it take paying AWS to host a Vmix to reach $500? The cost of a PC plus, can you drive Vmix and AWS with a Mac?
Go ahead, Paul, and then Jeffrey.
Yeah, 2 words, Leland Best. He's got a free 5, I think he's got 4 tutorial sessions left on Vmix. I would highly recommend that. It doesn't cost anything, and Leland's the go-to guy for Vmix.
I would definitely, before I jumped off the Mac platform, I would try out Mimo Live. I mean, I think Mimo Live, if you're trying to do something in OBS, I would at least give it a shot because it may cost a little bit more over time because it's, I think I don't know how much it is per month for the big one, but I think that that's what I use when I'm using a software-based switcher on the Mac. So if you're on a Mac, before you go buy a PC, just see if that leans towards your direction. But go ahead, Jeffrey.
So OBS doesn't work that well on a Mac because they use OpenGL over Metal, and everybody's been waiting for Metal to happen. Moving it over to the PC, you're saying a $500 PC. You should actually double that. It should be at least around $900 PC that you would use on that. For AWS, I can't speak on that, how much that would cost from there. But that's where and it really depends on what you're streaming. If it's one camera, then maybe a $500 PC will work. But if you're doing multi-cameras with graphics and stuff like that, you need to bump things up a little bit.
And go ahead, Leo, and then Guy, but really fast. We're running out of time.
Very quickly, the main thing I'll say about the AWS side is where is your inputs coming from? Because it's all very well, OBS and Vmix, everything else was designed to be in the venue, and your inputs coming here. You can pipe that all through to AWS, but that adds a lot of complexity if what you're trying to do is just do a simple mix.
Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, at about $1.50 an hour. I mean, you could kind of do the divisor. The important thing is how much data are you going out to, because it's no data, it's no cost going in, but it is an out fee. So if you're streaming for 24 hours a day or something, it'll rack up really quick. I think we're calculating about $700 a month if we were just to leave a machine on 24 hours a day, which we wouldn't do. But most shows, I kind of laugh at it. There was a Diogo in the Vmix area of the Discord saying that his whole show was like 30 pounds for a pretty complex one with multiple machines spun up. So you can do pretty complicated stuff for $30 a day.
Yeah. Next question.
Nick Pavlik of Southeast Michigan says, of all the video experience on this panel, has anybody recorded a UFO or something they couldn't explain?
Sasquatch.
Well,
I don't know.
80% of what I do, I can't explain. So,
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
but I don't think that's anything to do with UFOs.
I'm trying to think if I don't think we've ever had anything where that I would truly call. I mean, I've had unexplained events during. I've had some, but I don't think I've ever seen anything like that. I think we're stumped. All right, next question.
Tobias Moss of Minneapolis, tech savvy rabbi here. Does panel have any experience with virtual worship? Any momentum for a second hour on the subject one day? And he notes, we've been getting great reps at Zoom worship, but as soon reopening, so hybrid will present new buckets of challenges.
If only we had somebody who thought about this a lot. Leo, I'd love to give you more time, but just in a couple minutes.
I'll
just
be
give the
very
highlight.
fast.
Yeah.
Sunday, I start a show similar to this, all about virtual worship for synagogues. You can find it on Synagogue Tech on Facebook, and I'll put a link in Makana. But it is literally along this line for synagogues and the differences and the issues that they have. Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead, John.
I pray before every event.
All right, next question.
Shane Foley of Ashland, Oregon says, what's the difference between a chromakey and a lumakey?
Chromakey is looking at a certain color and then keying against that color. A lumakey is doing that color is always black. So it's always keying based on black, while the chromakey is identifying a specific color. In most keying, lumakey, if you can pull it off, will look better than a chromakey because most of your video footage is 422, which means your color is half resolution. So if you key off of a green, you're actually getting only half the resolution. You can often see, if you look carefully, you can often see some stair stepping that's going on in that key, especially if you're trying to use it for graphics. So just note that, but you do have more detailed control, over that. And part of that's the limitation of what most chroma keyers do. There's a standard chroma key is really a very basic thing that's just doing that kind of looking for that color and pulling it. Whereas you can do things like geometric keyers, like the Panasonic switchers use basically something that looks a lot like a Primat. And so it's a geometric keyer, and it actually does a much better job. But if you're doing simple graphics, lumakey is actually better, or obviously the best thing for graphics would be a key fill, 2 inputs. That's going to be the highest quality. Then for simple graphics, I would typically use a lumakey actually over a chroma key if I could avoid it. Next question.
Doug Ferguson, Fort Wayne, Indiana. If you know comms are not going to work with a certain panelist, how do you deal with queuing the show?
Google Docs. That is the low end version of it is Google Docs. Is you put a Google Docs on their window next to them if they're going to be there, and you can send them questions and delete them, and they have a live feed of what you're typing in. Anyone else has? I think it's pretty popular.
I meant queuing them live, like, hey, you're on.
Oh, well, so is it the beginning of the show or the middle of the show?
Middle of the show.
Rehearsal?
I did a tech check with these guys, and they just installed Zoom, so there's no way they're going to do Zoom in comms.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Bill, and then Jason, then John.
I'd say get a spouse with a cell phone and have them do a floor director queue. Just you're on.
Mm-hmm. You can try to get them to put a phone if they're willing to put a phone in their ear, but yeah. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I like Bill's idea, but there's an iOS app called World Tally that will allow you to use Tally for iOS, and that'll just change the screen color, and it'll work anywhere.
I've never heard of World Tally. That sounds like a great idea. Go ahead, John Ellison.
Back in the days of satellite video conferencing, we had a set of key phrases like safe words that we knew we could say to give them the heads up that they're going to be on next.
You want Mickey?
Yeah, if you're able to tie in your comm system to what you're feeding out to them via Zoom, then that could be a solution so that you don't have to set up a separate comm system.
I mean, the way we do it over Zoom is that we feed the comms back into Zoom. So that's why we do point to point. And so we do point-to-points for everybody because now you don't need anything new. You just open up Zoom and I have comms back to you. And that's the big power of having that isolated input for each person, is you have an isolated return to each person. So you can decide, you can send specific notes to them. You can do all kinds of other things in that return feed. The reason we don't send notes is because when Zoom closes out, and we have to look, because there have been some changes in rooms, but in rooms, when the person mutes, it shows their return. So if they do that, it'll show all the notes and anything else we were sending back to it. And I don't know if that's been updated. We're about to do some tests this week. Go ahead, John. John Ilson. Oop.
All right, I thought Jason was first. You can use the translator channel also. We use that as a back channel comm at one point.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Leo Mindell of London, who is just up front here, says a few weeks ago on Saturday, it was found that Zoom changes the broadcast view of co-hosts on co-hosts, if not host. I remember that. I was asked about this and suggested it was reported to Zoom as a fault. However, the response is there's no fault. Any suggestion on how to get this checked?
Oof. As my kids would say.
It's not a bug, it's a feature response that we love so much?
No feature in that. It's like a disaster train wreck, Jeffrey.
Educate your co-hosts. That's probably the best thing you can do at this point.
You have to limit the number of co-hosts you have, because it's very destructive for them to have to look at the speaker view instead of the grid. But you want the viewers to watch it. It's just it's a real big bummer. Go ahead, Mickey.
I'm just waiting for John Ellison to blink a few times.
Next question. Next question.
Jim E. of Louisville, I assume Kentucky. Your thoughts on the follow me type cameras?
You know, we should Andy Carluccio actually knows a lot about this, because he's been working on some stuff that does the follow me's. In an event situation, they're actually pretty useful. The big thing is that you want, which we haven't seen, we've just thought about a lot while we watch these follow me cameras work. A follow me camera is someone puts a sensor oftentimes in their shirt or in their jacket, and the camera just knows where that is. So PTZ camera just looks at them and just keeps following them around the stage. And the hard part is that it oftentimes wants to keep it centered, or it's hard to keep it, giving them nose room, or all the things that you really want when you're doing the camera work. So we haven't found that they've been great at framing well. What does work is for them to allow them to do all the hard work of tracking them, and then be able to put an overlay over top of it, which we haven't been able to do very effectively. We know that that's the way to do this, is to be able to basically add another information to it, so that it's always centering in its mind, the system's always centering, but then you're adding a little bit of flavor one way or the other. And we haven't seen that. Paul, real quick.
I use the huddle cam. Let me see if I can bring up the huddle cam here.
Probably don't have enough time for show and tell. So you're using huddle cam.
There's the huddle cam, and it follows me wherever I go. See how it's following me? Mm-hmm. But I think I'm going to hook up the little Sony blogger camera. It's got a better follow than the huddle cam. And then this has all this garbage, that's on screen that I can't get rid of also.
Right. Yeah. Yep. Next question.
Oh, moving on. Ruben Marchena of Grand Rapids, Michigan says, so what is a constellation?
Constellation it's a good question. The Constellation is kind of the flagship switcher that Blackmagic makes. So it's about $10,000, and it's got 40 inputs and 24 outputs. It theoretically could do 8K, but Blackmagic doesn't make evidently an 8K camera that works with their own switcher. Not that I'm bitter. So anyway, but it otherwise it's a 4K or 1080p. It does a lot of different things, but it's a very, very powerful switcher from Blackmagic. Next question.
Gregory Wheeler has a specific lens question. Anybody use the Olympus M.Zuiko digital ED 40 to 150 millimeter f4.0 to 5.6 R zoom lens? Is it controllable with the Blackmagic Design Micro Studio 4K? And everybody runs to Zoom to look it up.
I am not certain that one is. I think you'll be able to control focus, but not zoom. But a lot of the reason I looked at it is Olympus. I have some of these Olympus lenses, and they have manual focus and manual zoom on them. And when that's the case, you won't be able to do it. So you'd have to look at whether it does auto. It will not be able to do zoom. The question is whether it can do autofocus or not. Jason and Jeffrey, you got like 15 seconds.
I've had really great luck with the Lumix series of PZ. It has to be power zoom. Other than that, I wouldn't bet on it.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
I don't think I don't see anything where it has an auto option to it on that.
All right, we're changing subjects here and kind of moving them. So we will thank you all, and I want to introduce Matt Bach. Matt Bach is from Puget Sound Systems. I want to say Puget Sound, but it's Puget Systems. Are you near Puget Sound?
Yeah, we actually are. We actually used to be called Puget Sound Systems, but people kept thinking we were selling car audio and things like that, so we changed it to Puget Systems.
Very good, very good. So anyway, so Matt is from Puget Systems. Tell us, Matt, a little bit about what you do.
Sure. So Puget Systems as a whole, we're a workstation integrator. The thing that's a little bit different with us is we're very focused on like the workflow of our customers. We don't like to talk hardware. First off, we like to talk, what are you doing? What applications are you using? What codecs are you using? What cameras? What's your workflow like? And then we're like the experts on the hardware side, and we say, okay, you need this for your workflow and for your budget. And my part at Puget is I'm part of our labs division, where we test whenever Intel, NVIDIA, all these new people release new things, or like Blackmagic, they launched Blackmagic Raw a little while, well, it's probably been a year or two now, but a while ago. We look at how all those things actually play together, because computer hardware is super complicated. You can easily spend more money and get worse performance, and vice versa, and different applications change. And so like that's the only way that we can keep up, is by doing all this testing constantly.
And most of your clients are in the audio visual world. I mean, they're media creators, or is it a bit of everything?
Post-production is probably our biggest single bucket, but we also do graphic design, VFX, scientific and HPC work is a big thing right now. All the machine learning, all that kind of jazz. We do some even in like engineering spaces, but I'd say post-production is probably our biggest single bucket. And we don't want to go too wide, because we've learned that, man, in order to support, people like you guys, like we need to make sure that we are very focused on, what our support staff is training in, and going too wide, we lose all that value, to our customers.
Right. No, absolutely. If you have questions for Matt about building systems or what's important, go ahead and throw them into Mukana. As we kind of, how Matt, where did you start in the company? Is this your company, or did you come into it?
So mine is, I'm a little unique. My brother is actually the person who started the company. He started it when he was, I think, a sophomore in college. And I started working for Puget when I was I think it was a junior in high school. So I've been at Puget for 19 years now, and I'm 35. So it's been more than half my life I've been at Puget. But I've been there since almost the beginning. I did a production for a very, very long time. Excuse me. So like the actual building of the machines. And then I moved over to the labs role maybe 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And what are the biggest trends that you've seen in the last 20 years? Like what have you seen change?
One, computers are getting a whole lot more simple and a whole lot more complicated at the same time. They're a lot easier to like put together, but there's so many more options. You don't just now have a CPU with just one core. Now we have CPUs that go up to 64 cores, and just see all that stuff has just changed over time. And it's just been, and as like software tries to take advantage of all these things, CPU higher core counts was a big thing for a while, and then now GPU is becoming a bigger deal. And we're seeing that, like a good example is After Effects. After Effects, for a while they were increasing core support for multi-core things, and then in I think it was 2016 or 2015 they dropped support for their multi-thread stuff because they're adding GPU or GPU processing. And so just seeing how all these things have changed, and it's just been kind of a whirlwind. It seems like every 5 or 6 years or so there's like a big shift that we've got to make sure we're on top of.
Do you see any big shifts coming?
I think the big shifts coming up are actually not going to be on the hardware side. GPU is a big thing. GPU processing is always going to be a bigger and bigger deal. There is the stuff from Apple, they're doing the ARM, the M1 Max and all that. That's going to make some changes, but I think more is going to be the tools and on the software side. So a lot of like the machine learning things, like there's a lot of stuff that's behind the hood is machine learning and people don't even realize it. Things like, even in like Photoshop, like all the content aware fill, or they've got that now in like After Effects, or like DaVinci Resolve, they've been adding all of these, like, what was it, the magic masks and all of that kind of stuff. And I think those are going to be the biggest difference in the next 5 years. All these tools that will make the lives of people in post-production easier. It's not going to take their jobs. It's going to make it so much easier. Like all the auto rotoscoping, auto subtitles, all that kind of stuff, which probably are never going to be as good as someone actually doing it manually, but it'll get you 80% of the way there, 90% of the way there. And then you just have to spend that 10% of time rather than all of that time on it.
No, absolutely. Let's go ahead and jump into some of the questions, Bill.
Okay, the highest rated we've had so far in. Alex Olignowitz of Toronto says, how are you dealing with the shortage of GPUs?
Actually, right now for us, the shortage is mostly over. It's unique because the distribution lines for system integrators like us and for like end users trying to buy it from Amazon or Newegg, they're separate. And for most end users, they're still dealing with all the scalpers and like ridiculous prices. For us, actually, we're able to get enough supply for our customers. So for us, it's largely over. We still have, there's still other shortages. CPUs are still in shortage and things like that. But right now, we're actually doing okay.
How do you compare the AMD and the NVIDIA graphics cards?
If you're in post-production, you just use NVIDIA. AMD, they're just... it's just a different focus.
We agree. I'm just it was kind of like it's and why do you what's your case for, I mean, I have my own cases for it, but what's your case for using NVIDIA over AMD?
It's just pure performance and stability. That's what it is right now. Performance side, AMD right now, they're just focused on gaming, and they're nowhere near as big as like NVIDIA in the graphics space. So they don't have quite as investment. They don't have all the back end of CUDA. And that's, from what I've heard from developers, is much easier to work on with CUDA than like OpenCL. But it's just, straight performance, price to performance. Either way you look at it, NVIDIA is just way ahead. And like stability wise, NVIDIA tends to have more stable drivers. Their hardware, it's hard to say. A lot of people using AMD are like DIYers, and well, NVIDIA too, but they push their systems really far. So it's hard to know like what is someone pushing it too far and what is like actual hardware reliability. But pretty much, right now, if you're doing GPUs and you're in like any sort of post-production, you're just going to use NVIDIA, and that's what it is.
Right. Let's go to the next question.
Alex Forty Goldner here in the panel from London. When popular post-production PC applications change the amount they rely on the GPU versus the CPU, do you design different custom PCs to suit them? For example, as After Effects, you just mentioned, that is able to deal with multiple CPUs and GPUs differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a constantly changing ecosystem. And like, I don't actually know of too many people that are doing all of the research into, keeping up with that as us. And just a little plug for ourselves. If you go to our website, futuresystems.com, and you go to the navigation, there's publications, and pretty much all of the testing we do is available for you to, go through, read the results, look at the charts, lots and lots of numbers. But and we have to do that. We have to constantly do that every time there's a major hardware release, every time there's a major software update. That's the only way we can do it, because if we were to rely on, say, Adobe's marketing stuff, oftentimes like it might be true, but it's like not really a big deal. Like they could say, oh yeah, we improved performance of this by 4 times, but it could be something that like, okay, it took, a quarter of a second before, and now it's taking 1/10 of a second, and it's something I do 10 times a day. Like, yeah, who cares? And other times they might not even understand how big of a deal it is. So it's not even noted. And so the only way to find out is for us to be doing this kind of testing. So yeah, it's constantly changing. At least right now, the good news is most things are going towards adding GPU support. So GPU acceleration support. And GPUs are relatively easy to upgrade in a computer. The really bad ones is like the one I was talking about with After Effects, where we went virtually overnight, where we were selling $20,000, $30,000 dual Xeon workstations, and the next day they were being beat by $2,000 or $3,000 essentially gaming PCs, because suddenly all of these cores was actually bad for performance because each individual core wasn't all that powerful. So yeah, it changes, but that's at least the only like big one where it was like people who had spent significant money ended up with something that wasn't great because of software changes. And at least that, like, you can always just not update. Like most of the time when you're in like a production environment, you don't want to be on the latest version anyway. You want to be lagging behind, so that can give you a little bit of time to adjust to those new software changes.
It makes coming out of production even more fun, like more exciting. We were on, when I was working on Star Wars, we didn't, of course, update After Effects, for years. And so when we came out, we were like, look at all these tools that we can use. It was very exciting. Anyway, next question.
Alex is back with, if you could make M1 based PCs, how much faster or slower would they be than Intel or AMD based PCs for the same budget, do you think?
That's a really, really hard one. So we've done some testing with the M1s. I actually have a M1 MacBook back there. And it's a really cool technology. Like for like laptops, especially, and like lower power things, man, that stuff is amazing. That M1, like, oh, it's really cool. I think what we have to learn is how that's going to translate to higher end things. Because in the end, like that's still essentially an ultrabook. Like it's or an ultralight. Like it's not something you're going to really be piping high end stuff through, or things where you need to like export super fast, or you're going to be doing a whole lot of grading on in Resolve or whatever. So I think we just have to wait and see how it's going to translate. And we just don't know. I mean, there's so much optimization that's gone into the x86 architecture, the normal Intel and AMD CPUs. It's going to take a long time for that to catch up on the M1s. And we just don't know. We have no idea. So it's kind of a wait and see approach right now.
Next question.
Our own Mickey from the Philippines. Do you collaborate with software developers in your R&D? And if so, how deep a collaboration does it typically get?
Yeah, we do. We're an Adobe partner. Blackmagic, we are trying to get into. Blackmagic's just a little bit bigger of a company, because it's not just Resolve. Resolve is such a small part of Blackmagic, whereas Adobe, like everything Adobe is software. But yeah, we do collaborate. We've got, we have regular sync meetings. We talk to the individual teams, Photoshop team, the Premiere team, the After Effects team. As far as how deep it goes, I don't know. It's probably deeper than I even realize, just because we're talking regularly. But there's definitely a lot of back and forth. They come to us with questions, we come to them with questions. Yeah,
that's great. Next question.
Jesse Mills in San Francisco Bay Area says, what does Puget Systems recommend for a build that will act as a 4K NDI hub with 6 to 8 sources, streaming encoding system, and editing system? We'll need a dual NIC for Dante and NDI.
Probably something like Threadripper, an AMD Threadripper based system, to have plenty of cores, and everything for that. Most of that stuff, it depends on your software, whether it's going to be like GPU accelerated or not. But the one thing you might need to look into is if it is going to use the GPU for like the decoding or encoding of your streams, which I guess it wouldn't be the decoding, but the encoding. You might need to use a Quadro video card. One of the differences between GeForce cards and Quadros is how many what they call NVIDIA encoding chips are on it. GeForce just has one. Most of the Quadro cards support multiple streams, so you might need to go with a Quadro card. The one caveat with that is the highest end Quadro card, I guess technically it's previous generation now, the RTX 6000 and 8000 only support one stream, just like GeForce for, I don't know why. So you don't actually want the highest end Quadro card, but go just one step down, like a RTX 4000 or 5000 is probably plenty. But
and how many encodes do those support?
I don't know if they actually say. It's multiple at least. A lot of our testing is actually around like Premiere Pro and things like that, and we found like with multicam, like H264 multicam, and are out, like it's a big difference, but it's hard to say because even if it's only a single encoding stream, it can still kind of support multiple at the same time. So it's hard to say exactly.
It is interesting. How do you make the decision between the gaming cards and the quadro cards, like the more professional cards? What is really distinguishing? Because a lot of people say, like, well, on paper they kind of look the same, and these ones are really fast. Like, what makes the pro card a pro card?
Yeah. So actually, most of the time we lead with the GeForce cards on most of our systems. They're just so much more cost effective, and performance wise, they will be faster per dollar and absolute. Like the two top end cards right now are the RTX 3090 GeForce and the A6000. I think they're technically dropping the Quadro name on it, but the A6000 Quadro. And the RTX 3090 is slightly faster than the A6000. So it's not really performance. Performance is not the reason you'd go with a workstation card. It's a couple of different things. One, hardware reliability. They are slightly more reliable. Most hardware these days is pretty good as long as you're not getting like the crazy overclock, flashing LEDs everywhere, skulls and crossbones and stuff. But so reliability is slightly higher, but it's something like, I want to say it's like 0.9% failure rate in the field for us versus 0.3 with Quadro. So yeah, it's 3 times more reliable, but it's not a huge difference in absolute terms. I think the biggest thing is the driver support, though. Quadro cards, the drivers go through so much more in the way of validation in all of these applications. They don't push anything that's going to be problematic, or at least shouldn't be problematic. The GeForce cards do have something relatively new called their studio drivers, and those are way better than the game drivers. Like if you're using a GeForce card, you use the studio drivers, because the game ready drivers, they will push updates, day 0 updates to the drivers. Like right before they push it up on nvidia.com, they could be making changes minutes before. And there were a whole lot of problems 2 or 3 weeks ago or so with just the game ready drivers just causing problem after problem in Premiere Pro and Resolve and all of these different things. And it's to the point where like on all the Reddit subreddits, there was a sticky every single time. It's like, I saw you said GPU. Are you using a GeForce card? Because it switched to studio drivers. So I think that's the big thing, is the driver support. Hardware reliability is a little bit, and there is some things in some special use cases. There's like the higher VRAM. So if you're doing 8K with a whole lot of noise reduction in Resolve or something like that, you might need to invest in a Quadro. But we tend to lead with GeForce because they're so much more affordable. Like in some cases, we have some customers where they are buying multiple machines and they just buy a whole extra machine. And if there's a problem with that, with one of those machines using GeForce, they just swap the whole machine, and it's faster and it's cheaper for them, and it gives them some redundancy. It just depends on your workflows.
Yeah. Next question.
Mickey from here in the panel from Manila in the Philippines says, I love Puget's technical articles and papers, and then he has created a custom flashing nerd badge that is fabulous. Why does Puget share these to the public for free despite taking vast resources to create?
Essentially, it's our marketing. We're starting to branch out our marketing a little bit now. We're doing work with influencers. We've never done anything like TV or Well, we've done I think a few magazine things, but not much. So it's mostly our marketing arm of our company. Getting all this information out there. There's the world of computers is insanely big. Like you have all the people that are DIY. They're never going to be our customers, but they can benefit from all of our research and all of our testing. And then basically they just become evangelists for us. If they have a coworker or family who asks like, hey, I need a system for, video editing. I don't want to build my own. I want all the support that goes behind it. Who should I go with? We're just in their mind. And that's true, not even for just DIYers, people that are locked into like a Dell contract. They see all the work we do, how much, we value, educating people and sharing, and just advancing the industry as a whole. And, as soon as they're out of that contract with Dell or HP or whatever, or, they need a system for home, hey, we're in their mind. So that's basically how we, justify the cost, because it is a big cost. I mean, our labs team is now up to 4 employees full time. And, so that costs a lot of money, and all the hardware too. Oh man, every time, there's a new hardware launch. Oftentimes, we're partners with like Intel and an AMD, and like we can get samples from them. But video cards, all the motherboards, all the cooler, power supplies. So yeah, it's a big cost, but it pays off.
Next question.
Raybar Chenier, our friend from Occoquan, Virginia, says, Matt, in your opinion, what are the top GPU cards out there for color grading in Resolve?
Color grading, well, it depends on how deep you're going. Like if it's just a simple grade, like you really don't need all that much. But once you get into like OpenFX, noise reduction, all of that jazz, I'd say the two cards that we do, well, let's say even the three cards that we do most often, RTX 3080, that's a GeForce card. That's kind of a, if you're doing up to like 4K work, you're never going above that. You're not doing too much in the way of like noise reduction. That's a good, like, I wouldn't call it entry, but like maybe standard card. And then a step up from that, you can kind of go in two different directions. I was talking about these two cards before, but the RTX 3090 GeForce, that's good for up to 8K work, and it's a very solid card. The one issue with that card is right now, because of the way they do like the coolers and what they're designed for, you can really only use two of those cards. So at a certain point, you're not going to be able to get enough oomph behind it if you want to be able to do like red 5K with noise reduction all live and in timeline, with no proxies or optimized media or anything. It might not quite have the oomph for it. The other way you can go is with the Quadro line, the A6000, tons of VRAM. Performance is roughly on par with the 3090, but the big difference is you can do up to 4 of those cards, and that's just because of how the coolers are designed. You can stack them in a computer and they won't overheat. So you can go those two routes. As far as like output and stuff, they're all going to be basically the same. I mean, all NVIDIA cards now support 10-bit displays, so you get that. But you should always be using a deck link, for a reference monitor anyway. But at least you have that for your main displays.
Do you build any systems for like distributed rendering for something like Resolve?
Not a ton. I'm sure there's some in there where like it just doesn't come up that's what it's for. They just say, hey, we need systems for Resolve, and then they put them into a render farm. But not as much. We do more of those for like VFX, like After Effects kind of things, or for true 3D rendering with rendering engines like Octane and all those kind of jazz.
I have a lot of PCs sitting around in my office. I suddenly realized, why am I not using those between shows? Just having a configuration that we just turn them all on and let them rip. Anyway, next question.
Alex Skolner is back again, asking you, I guess, a little speculation. Who will eventually threaten NVIDIA when it comes to GPUs, AMD or Apple?
I don't know if it'll be Apple. Apple is so tight in their ecosystem that it's almost like you're kind of saying, like, is this bicycle company going to threaten this car company? Like, it's not really the same thing. They're like in different kind of areas. So I don't think it'll be Apple as much for like NVIDIA in particular. I think the main question is actually going to be AMD or Intel, because Intel is getting into the graphics scene right now. I think they had their first GPU launched. It was a very weird launch, but it's not something they're really pushing. Like it's a first gen product. They're not pushing it because it's so new for them. But I think
when you say it's so new for them, it's not that good.
No, well, in terms of like pure performance, no.
Yeah.
But they didn't expect it to be good.
Like
that wasn't their goal.
Right.
So I do think that like Intel is a huge company. They have so much R&D. I think they could easily eclipse like AMD and potentially even threaten NVIDIA. It's just how long is it going to take? AMD is kind of the wild card. Right now, like I was saying before, they're so focused on gaming that it's hard to know whether they will make the shift and like try to bring back the really like the production kind of things, because they were for a while. A few years ago they released a card called the Radeon 7, and it was a terrific card. The problem was it was essentially gone on launch. Like they made not that many of them, and so it just kind of disappeared fast. But that was an amazing card, and if AMD gets back to that, then great. I think a lot of that will depend on not their engineers. It's the CEOs and all that stuff, saying which direction the company is going to go. And who knows, like if they have a CEO change in a few years, yeah, maybe they'll come back. But Lisa Su is, doing an amazing job for the company as a whole. So I don't know if they're going to change their tactic anytime soon, just because of how successful they've been.
And I think that the problem is that they fundamentally have an architecture that I know that from when we were writing a lot of stuff that's GPU heavy, and I wasn't the programmer, but as I remember it, it was the way that they fragment memory was really painful for us to write for, and so it was really good for games and really bad for production. Like it was just really hard to the point where I think we just stopped supporting them. Like we said, oh, it doesn't work on an AMD. Like it was just too hard for us to do what we were doing. This is with a program called Conduit, which is all GPU based compositing. And so I think that's the problem is they have a fundamental, I believe they have a fundamental flaw, in the way that they approach it. And those kinds of things are really difficult to get over because it's not a matter of making them better or faster. It's a matter of like stopping the line and changing completely changing the thought process. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. Go ahead, Bill. Next question.
Jesse Mills, the San Francisco Bay Area, says, what's the modern equivalent to the Quadro RTX 4000 GPU that has NVENC or NVENC encoding?
Well, it's still the RTX 4000. They've NVIDIA on the Quadro side, it seems like they do kind of, well, everything it feels like recently has been like rolling launches. Like, well, they'll launch one of a new series, and then like a month later the next, and then a month later the next. And so it's like these rolling launches, which is a huge pain for us as like doing all these reviews and testing, because it means like every month we've got to redo everything, which is a pain. Right. But so right now, the new line of the Quadros, they've only launched the A6000. That's the RTX 6000 and 8000 equivalent. So that one's out now. Presumably, there will be like an A4000, at some point. I don't believe there's anything official about it, but that would be the next one. And just judging by the performance gain we saw going from the RTX 6000 to the A6000, it might be worth it to wait. It's just hard to know. I mean, there's always something new coming. So you can't always just keep waiting. At some point, you've just got to pull the trigger, even if there's going to be something new in a month, you've got to, at some point, you've got to invest in your current workflow and just go for it.
Next question.
Robert A. Olber of Houston, Texas says, have folks used your systems for Hackintosh builds?
I'm sure they have. We don't support that. For a while, we actually considered doing it as like an official thing because, man, you've got to get really exact on the hardware if you want to do a Hackintosh. Like, it's got to be the right chipset. You've got to have the right network controllers, the right video cards, because it's not made to do it. So you've got to get very specific. So we thought for a while about like, oh, maybe we'll show the system as like, yeah, you can use it as a Hackintosh. And then we decided we don't want to be sued out of, into oblivion by Apple. So we'd rather stay a company. So we decided against doing that. But I'm sure there are some people out there. The biggest hurdle is probably that we are almost entirely NVIDIA video cards, and NVIDIA cards aren't supported by Mac OS anymore. So you'd have to be using a pretty old version of Mac OS, which means you're not going to be able to use the latest versions of like Premiere Pro or Resolve. So that's the biggest hurdle with using our systems, at least as a Hackintosh.
Next question.
Guy Cochran from the panel in Seattle says, are you seeing more remote workers using RDP or something like Teradici to remote into powerful workstations at the office?
Some. We get questions about that. In fact, I do that. Like we have all of our test beds at the office. I think we're up to like a dozen or so now. And I have to remote in, and I don't want to be using a software-based remote desktop. So we actually have IP KVMs. So they're KVMs. They're a little box. They sit outside, the system, and they appear to the system like a keyboard, a mouse, and a monitor. So to the computer, it's as if you're sitting at the computer versus, well, even though I'm actually remoting in. And we do that because we don't want to mess with performance at all. Like we need actual performance numbers without having, remote desktop running. So we kind of deal with that. Our customers, we've actually probably had more people who are just moving their entire everything to home, or companies that are investing in home workstations rather than doing remote desktop. That's probably what we're actually getting more of, because I think a lot of these companies, everyone's starting to realize that working from home is no longer something that's not allowed. Like more and more, it's like it's accepted, and productivity is up for some people. It just depends on your workflows. Like if you have a ton of shared media, you've got 100 editors or something, like, yeah, that's not going to work quite right. But most of the companies that we deal with are smaller to medium production houses or individual, freelancers or one man band kind of situation. So I think we're getting more where they're wanting to bring everything local rather than doing remote.
Next question.
Alex Goldner back again from London saying, are there any aspects of the current Mac Pro design that have influenced high performance custom PC designs?
I don't know. The Mac Pro is an amazing piece of technology. We got one in to do some testing. We actually borrowed it from a YouTuber, Linus Tech Tips, because we didn't want to spend $30,000 on a system. And like engineering wise, like man, that thing is slick. Like if you ever have your hands on one and like you pull a case off, like the tolerances, the engineering in it is it's so good. But as far as like hardware goes, I don't know. Like Apple's in a weird place right now with their Mac Pros and now discontinued iMac Pros, and where they're kind of, unfortunately, they're just using all the wrong hardware. It's kind of unfortunate because like they're using Intel CPUs, and AMD has far eclipsed Intel right now. Like AMD CPUs are just way better. So they're using kind of the underdog CPUs. And then they're using AMD GPUs, which is a little bit different on Mac because they're going through Metal, not OpenCL, but still it's behind NVIDIA. So they're kind of operating from a position of weakness as far as like performance goes right now. I mean, it'll change. I think probably the only thing that might influence some stuff, or at least I hope it will influence things, is actually their Afterburner card. It's ProRes decoding. I think it does encoding too. Card like. That kind of thing, man, I've wanted that for so long. We have like GPU-based decoding for like H64 and HEVC. Red has their Rocket X card for their Red stuff. But it seems like more and more we're just doing like, let's just have the GPU handle the decoding. But I'd love to see a dedicated card that will actually handle, decoding of not just H64 and HEVC and all the flavors of those, because like GPU decoding and even like Intel's QuickSync doesn't support all of the flavors. They don't support 422. Which is really annoying. But like a PCIe or Thunderbolt-based card that can do that and handle things like Red or Blackmagic Raw and ProRes and DNX, that's what I would love to see.
And it'll get more interesting if there's a lot of ProRes solutions at 120 frames a second. You're gonna really need that card. Next question.
Tyler Darlington of San Diego says, do you foresee Apple supporting NVIDIA drivers for NVIDIA GPUs now that NVIDIA owns ARM?
I don't know. I know there was a whole lot of drama around why NVIDIA or Apple wasn't using NVIDIA and all of that. I think it might depend on some of all of that. I don't remember the details at this point. I just remember it was a big deal. So I think some of it will depend on whether they're willing to do that. What NVIDIA is going to charge them, because NVIDIA is not going to just let them do it for free. So I don't know. I hope so. Because progress in the industry as a whole is always good. Competition's always good. So if everything Apple's doing, like that's why one of the reasons why I'm excited about all the ARM stuff from Apple right now is because even if that means that Apple takes a huge lead over PCs in terms of like processing power and usefulness in applications like Premiere Pro, whatever, we'll take that hit for a while, because that means that then Intel and AMD and all these other guys are going to start spending up more in their R&D budgets, and competition is always good for end users and consumers and everybody. So I hope it happens. I wouldn't be too optimistic about it.
I'm curious, do you think that the modular systems can, like, so not with the M1, but when we think about an M2, M3, M4 with, 32 or 64 cores, 128 gigs of RAM, those types of things that are totally integrated, do you think the modular systems at some point have a hard time keep competing with that advanced bus structure?
I don't know. It's hard to say. Like there is advantages inherent in both methods. Like having everything locked down. I mean, that's just the very Apple thing, and they have a lot of advantages because of that. stability and like driver support and everything is one of the biggest ones, I would say. It's one of the reasons why Thunderbolt for the longest time was rock solid on Apple and terrible on PCs. Thunderbolt 1 and Thunderbolt 2 was just a nightmare on PCs. And it is because there's so many different things that are working together.
Right.
Apple controls all of those things. They control the motherboard, the firmwares, the drivers, the OS, so they can make sure everything works. PCs, you've got, this vendor and this manufacturer and this driver, and Windows Update screwing everything up. And so it was just kind of a nightmare. But on the other hand, what you get out of modularity is you can make the right choice. And more and more we're finding that like hardware, it's getting more complicated. You have CPUs that have 4 cores or 8 cores, and you have CPUs that have 64 cores. And someone that could say like, oh, I'm in post-production, you can't just have one system for it. Like if you're primarily an After Effects user, you're going to want those fewer cores. If you're primarily a Premiere Pro user, you're going to be somewhere in the middle. Resolve with a whole bunch of GPUs, probably on the higher end. So that's what you get out of the modularity is you can tailor things for exactly what you're doing with almost an infinite combination. So I think that often will offset a lot of the downsides of it. But yeah, it's just different workflows, different needs.
Yep, absolutely. Next question.
Courtney here in the panels from Hollywood says, does Puget Systems build large screen interactive systems, multi-touch kind of things in small video wall sizes?
We do the systems for it. We don't do like the video walls themselves. I'm trying to think. We did a recent case study of someone who did I believe they did like the video walls in the Space Needle here in Seattle. Which touchscreens right now, I don't think very many people are using those at the moment, large interactive video walls. But I can't remember what their name was, but we do some systems for that kind of thing. Because we have like our bigger, buckets that we do, Premiere Pro, DaVinci Resolve. But then we also, do a lot of things where we get highly involved conversations with the either the developers or the people that are using these systems about exactly what they need. And because oftentimes like you can't just get something off the shelf. They have something very unique. They need a whole bunch of video outputs, and so they need to go quadro with like sync cards, and like you just don't find those normally on off the shelf computers. Or we have some customers where they do, I don't know, they just have insane storage speed needs where they just like need more storage speed, where we tell them like, okay, well today we can do 20 to 30 gigabytes a second, and they're like, no, we need more. It's like, okay, we can do more, but it's getting kind of ridiculous here. And again, you're just not going to find that off the shelf. So yeah, we definitely do some of those.
What's the highest number of GPU cards have you ever put into a computer?
We do 8 GPU rack mounts. Those, I'm always amazed at how like many people go for those kind of things because they are just insanely expensive. But when whatever you're doing is making you thousands of dollars every hour, you make the investment. But that's what we do on like rack mounts most of the time in like a desktop environment. 3 right now is actually the limit before you're tripping like circuits in your house or office. The latest NVIDIA cards are like amazingly powerful, but they draw a lot of power. So a year ago, we would do quad GPU systems, and they'd be great for like rendering boxes and stuff. But now we have to limit it to 3, which in post-production isn't a big deal. Most of the time, that's for like DaVinci Resolve, but people want a deck link or they want like a 10G networking card. So you need that extra slot anyway for those things. So 3 GPUs plus a deck link and maybe a network card is pretty standard anyway. So at least that hasn't been too affected.
Next question.
Jason Bache here in the panel, Albuquerque, New Mexico, says, depending on the year, I build 1 to 5 high-end systems per quarter for my clients. Here's a question I always get, and I'd love to hear your answer. Which chipset is superior for production, AMD Ryzen or Intel, and why?
And why?
And I think that you
Intel
probably put
why?
this in a little before we already talked about it, but you think that, I think we kind of got to that one. That was the...
Oh yeah, I know the answer. I'm just curious
Yeah. So
I'm curious as to
I guess
how you answer that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So right now, AMD Ryzen is just light years, or not light years, but they're ahead in most workflows. There are some where Intel still competes with their Core series. Their X series line, I think we've essentially dropped it from our product line because it just doesn't have a place. But their core line, the Intel 10th gen, there's still a few places. Someone who's doing pure After Effects work, it can still be reasonable. There are some people who they will take a 5%, 10% performance hit in order to stick with a brand that they are ultra familiar with. They've seen all the ads for Intel Inside and all that stuff for years, so they're just more comfortable with it. Or they can get their purchasing department to sign off on something like that where they recognize the name. So we do still sell some systems for that with Intel, but if you're talking about Premiere Pro, DaVinci Resolve, again After Effects even just by itself, Ryzen is just so much faster. And we're just gonna have to see how that changes. There is the new 10th gen coming out very soon, which actually there's already a full review out there from, is it Tom's Hardware and Antec? One of them, they found a CPU for sale and they bought it. And because they bought it, they don't have to abide by NDA. So they actually have a full review out. And according to their results, it's not that impressive. So I think AMD is going to stay in the lead in terms of performance for a while. Again, Intel still has the name behind it. Still, I would say Intel still is probably a hair more reliable. AMD seems to have a few hiccups that come up every once in a while.
Next question.
Chris Widener of Lafayette, Indiana says, what KVM over IP are you using?
We're using, it's from a company called Raritan, Raritan. And it's been pretty good so far. We've had a few issues with the local HDMI out. So it's basically acting as a pass-through, so you can have a local keyboard, mouse, and monitor. That one has gotten some weird things. Luckily, we're not using that very often, so we just don't care. The worst thing with those units is just the setup, the network setup. There's a whole lot of security certificates and all these other things. We had to switch over to, oh man, I'm not really in our IT department, so I can't tell you exactly, but there was a lot of setup in order to make it easy for us to access offsite. If you're on a local network, oh, it's dirt simple. But if you're trying to go through a VPN externally, there's a little bit more setup. I mean, we got it working and everything, but they were probably the, well, because we also had a requirement of we needed 4K because we do all of our testing in 4K. And so we needed an IP KVM that would support 4K, and there was very few of them. So Raritan was the brand we went with.
Have you used any of the what are they, the extend points, the RGB?
No, I haven't.
Next question.
Comes from Guy Cochran here in the panel from Seattle. Can you talk about the system that you are the most proud of pushing out?
System most proud of pushing out? Man, there's so many. Because I mean, so often what's makes us proud or happy isn't the hardware that went into it. Hardware's hardware. It's not all that. I mean, it's exciting for us because we're all we're tech nerds and everything. But more often it's the what are people doing with it? Hearing that they're doing these crazy projects, or very some of them are very, very artsy things, things I'm not good at myself, but I can appreciate it, and it's really cool to see. Or that it's going and it's going to be used for some major Hollywood production, or there's some really cool ones. There was someone who's doing a whole bunch of VR audio work. So a lot of the audio work in one of the Spider-Man 3D or VR. I don't know if it's a film or game or experience, but that's the kind of the things that are more exciting to us, is what are people doing with them? And unfortunately, a lot of the times we can't talk about it because it's, they have NDAs, so they can't talk, publicly about what it is. But I think that's more impressive to me than the hardware.
Next question.
Mickey here in the panel is looking for your opinion on the motherboard manufacturer with the best or most reliable implementation of Thunderbolt 3 on the AMD platform.
Gigabyte. We've gone through a whole bunch of different motherboards over the years. Gigabyte has been consistently the brand where they've spent the most effort on Thunderbolt. That's going back to Thunderbolt 1 and Thunderbolt 2, where we were selling systems for Thunderbolt 2, and Gigabyte was the only brand where we could get it to work reliably. Other brands, some devices would work, others wouldn't. and it was just a nightmare. So we were pretty locked in and saying that Gigabyte's probably who we would recommend if you need Thunderbolt.
Have you ever released kits, like kits that people can build themselves? Like, you don't put them together. You just like sell them the pile of things that they need. It's kind of like a build at home kind of thing. Has that ever?
No, not really. Like,
Like, that's a
honestly, it
horrible
wouldn't
idea.
be cost
He's like,
effective.
that's a horrible idea. Yeah. All right, next question.
Mickey's back from the Philippines with what workloads or applications do AMD CPUs not work well on?
These days, not much. Previous generations, it was anything that was lightly threaded. So applications that don't use a whole lot of cores. Because for a long time, that was like AMD's claim to fame, was that they had more cores, but each individual core wasn't quite as fast. So things like After Effects, Photoshop would have been better on an Intel-based system than AMD. With their last generation, their Ryzen 5000 or even the 3000 series and their current Threadrippers, they've closed that gap and eclipsed it. So right now, AMD is faster for single-threaded. They are faster for multi-threaded. So in most of the time, AMD is just ahead. There are still small use cases. Intel has there's special instruction sets on the CPU for like AVX 512, AVX2, things that most people aren't even aware exist because it's not like a major spec. But there are some workflows, like if they are heavy AVX 512, Intel is still stronger. Most of the time, like if you're talking like Premiere Pro or whatever, don't worry about it. It's most of the time when we get into that kind of level of detail is people who are doing like machine learning development, and they know like, oh yes, the code I'm writing utilizes the AVX 512 instruction sets. Okay, then yeah, you'd go Intel. But that's really that, and the people like performance-wise, that's really it. That's really the only area.
Go ahead, Jason.
I only have one thing to add to that, and it may be a generation old, but extremely long and precise floating point Intel tends to do better with. They may have fixed that in the last generation or two. I haven't had to do it maybe in a year or two.
Next question.
Yeah.
Did you have something to add to that, Matt, or did you?
Oh, I was just going to say I hadn't really heard about that. That's really interesting. But that could be, if you're doing really, really precise things where you need very, exacting, numbers and whatever, Intel is the more established, I'd say, technology as far as like, that kind of thing goes. So if you're doing like simulations for like a bridge that people are going to be driving over, yeah, you might still go with the Intel-based platform, even though it's not quite as fast, because it's just got a longer history behind it than like the AMD Ryzens and those kind of things. And so you might go that route.
Next question.
Comes from Eddie Martinez of Sacramento, and he says, where would you point someone to wipe and build a clean system, remove all the bloatware, and get the correct drivers installed? And he notes he's a Mac guy, but this is a Windows 10 question.
Man, I'm not sure. We're very careful that our systems don't come with bloat. Like, we don't get paid by Microsoft to install the Office trial and all these other junk things. So we don't do any of that. So I'm not honestly sure where. If it was me and my own system, I wouldn't try to remove all that stuff. I just reinstall Windows. Doing that, probably the easiest thing is to find someone local. Because they're going to have to be at the computer in person. But finding those kind of people, I'm not sure. Any sort of computer shop or repair shop should be able to do it. But, the thing with PCs, and like repair and everything in general is you never quite know what the quality of the person is going to be.
All right, go ahead, Jason.
I will not touch a new system unless a client will allow me to wipe it entirely. Windows 10 is so promiscuous by default out of the box that it needs to be locked down in order to be both performant but also safe and secure.
Next question.
Paul Wallace of Austin, Texas. What's a good bare bones, low cost starter system that can expand? And he's looking for a Model N price.
Bare bones. We do more higher end systems, so I'm not sure about on bare bones. You might. honestly, if you're like talking about that and like expanding, your best bet might be to DIY it. I mean, you get so much more control. If you're not someone who's interested in that, or you don't have the time or the investment, there are companies that will sell systems at cheaper. Who I would actually recommend, because I'm not too enough familiar to like really say like this brand and model. Um, Linus Tech Tips did a recent secret shopper between a bunch of different companies who do essentially that, budget friendly systems, and they had some really great observations. So you might Google on YouTube Linus Tech Tips secret shopper. I think they did it like 4 or 5 months ago, but that was one of the better ones I've seen recently about like the different brands. So you might just give that a watch. The only thing I would say to not do is, if you want something that's going to expand in the future, don't go with the big box, Dell, HPs, and those guys. They have a lot of proprietary things. They're not made to be upgradable, per se. Like there's some things you can do, but that's just not what they're designed for. So you'd probably be looking for something like a custom-ish machine.
Next question.
And apologize for the lawnmower. Alex 4D Goldner in London says, now that Intel has rationalized Thunderbolt with Thunderbolt 4, what benefits will there be to PC and Mac users?
I don't know. I see Jason's raising his hand. Let's just let him take that one.
Go ahead, Jason.
I've had to answer this very recently. The answer is Thunderbolt will work consistently on PCs, and the promise of Thunderbolt 4 is not a feature addition for Mac users, but what it is in fact a cross-platform consistency that we've wanted for quite a while.
Next question.
Beju of India says, with the advantage of AMD over Intel processors, how are you seeing Thunderbolt 3.4 support for AMD in motherboards, etc., as a lot of accessories are moving to Thunderbolt 3?
So Thunderbolt on AMD is, I would consider it a partial success at the moment. On the Ryzen platforms, you can find Thunderbolt that works very well. Unfortunately, it's not on like everything. The Thunderbolt boards that we are carrying right now for AMD's Ryzen series are actually the B550 chipset, which for us isn't a big deal. Like it doesn't have like overclocking, like whatever. Like we don't want overclocking. At this point, overclocking gets you so little for the like stability and risk that it's just not something that many people do, especially in production environments. It's more of a bragging rights kind of a thing at this point. So it's not a big deal. You have to go with these lower chipsets. Like they're still solid chipsets. They just don't have like those kind of features. So on Ryzen, I think it's great. What's is unfortunate right now is Threadripper. We still haven't found a good implementation of Thunderbolt on the Threadripper boards or the new Threadripper Pros that just launched. Like that is where it hurts right now, not having Thunderbolt, because those are the higher end platforms where like the people who are investing lots of money are going into, and it's unfortunate that we don't have a great Thunderbolt that we've found, at least on it. Hopefully that will change. I mean, I'm hoping that the implementation on the Ryzen side is just like they're dipping their toe in the water, and then they'll implement it on the higher end systems. I do know that it's all complicated, and for the longest time, Thunderbolt support on AMD wasn't even official because it wasn't certified by Intel, because Intel owns Thunderbolt, and so they weren't really incentivized to certify AMD platforms. But it looks like that's changing, and I hope it continues to change.
Next question.
Mickey is back from the Philippines. Favorite 3-unit or 4-unit rack mount chassis with space for 3 full-length PCIe cards?
Oh, who do we use? I don't deal with rack mounts all that often. I believe we're using iStar quite a bit right now. Man, it's tough finding rack mounts that like will support full-length video cards and don't just have like stupid things. Like it seems like rack mounts are so specialty designed, where finding something that actually is robust and like intelligently laid out is really, really, really tough. Trying to find who it is we sell. Yeah. Oh no, Inwin. Inwin is who we use quite a bit right now. I know we've used some iStar in the past, but Inwin is probably your best starting point for something that isn't super hyper specific in what you're doing.
Next question.
Raybar Chenair, our friend from Ahoquin, says, has Puget seen an increase in folks asking for Linux boots versus Linux boots versus Windows when purchasing a custom box?
I'd say it's increasing, but still not like a huge segment for us. And there's a bunch of weird things right now too, where we were doing CentOS was one of our primary Linux distributions we were using, and they've made some changes that people are not very happy with as far as like how they're operating. So we're switching back to like Ubuntu right now. We're finding that a lot of our it's kind of a mix. A lot of the people who want Linux, they actually end up just buying no OS from us because they're like, oh, I'm just going to wipe it. I'm going to do my own installs of Linux because that's typically how the people who use Linux are. We usually try to get them to at least like, no, go ahead and get the Linux so that you can receive the machine working, so you can see it's all working before you wipe it. Because man, the amount of support calls where people think that like they'll have no problems installing Linux, but they don't realize that installing Linux on a machine that's 4 years old is very different than a machine that is cutting edge, because all of that support isn't in place yet. So a lot of times like installing the drivers and such is a lot more complicated than they think. But to the original question, I do think it's increasing, but not vastly. Part of that is because we're probably our biggest single bucket is like the Adobe ecosystem, and the Adobe ecosystem doesn't work on Linux. So they're not going to get Linux for that.
We have one last question, but I think that we're going to save that for tomorrow, Paul, because all we're talking about is Clubhouse tomorrow. so we're going to go there. And I had a general question come in. Matt, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will admit, I wasn't sure when when Kevin brought it up. I was like, I don't know what if it would be useful or how we would fit this in. And so it's been a couple months of talking about that. And when I met you last week, I was like, oh, this is going to be great, and it was. So I think that we might try to drag you on every once in a while if you're open to it.
It's early in the morning, man. I'm not used to waking up this early.
Welcome to office hours.
Yeah, none of us were used to that. It builds on, it grows on you. We have an evening show too, so on Mondays, and so maybe we'll drag you into evening, maybe make the Monday ones something we can do with you. But thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate your time and appreciate you getting up so early for us.
Absolutely.
We understand most people in our industry it's not really their strong suit, so definitely appreciate your time. And thanks to the panel and to the attendees for great questions. It was that hour moved really fast. There was a lot to unwrap, and I think that there's still more to unwrap, especially as new hardware comes out. I think it would be really fun to get Matt to come back in, and talk about some of the new stuff, and maybe even when there's announcements or something, we'll see if we can drag him in and have him part of our Mystery Science Theater version of office hours. So anyway, thank you all. We're going to go ahead and jump into the post show. A reminder to everyone that we're actually got another one tonight. So this happens again, just because, remember that this is the night show. So tonight at 6. So what we're doing, by the way, is at 6 o'clock, we open the doors. I'm going to try to open a little early to give people time. The panelists need to be here by 6:10. We'll start doing, now we'll be a little loose, but 6:10 to 6:15, and then we really start the show at 6:30, and we'll do that until 8 o'clock. So anyway, just a reminder that this is the evening session, and otherwise we'll be talking about Clubhouse tomorrow. Discuss what the heck is this thing? We're experimenting with it, and we'll talk about some of the learning so far, how to interface with it, and how to manage it. All right, thanks everybody.